The number of asylum seekers arriving in Europe has skyrocketed. More than 40,000 people have crossed the Mediterranean Sea so far this year, one of the highest rates since the 2015 migration crisis. And some 700 have either died or gone missing in the first 3 months of the year en route. And to discuss this impending new crisis, I'm now joined by António Vitorino, the Director General of the International Organization for Migration. Thank you very much for having us here. This is actually not a new impending crisis. This is yet another chapter of a crisis that I feel like we've been seeing unfold in Europe for more than 8 years now. What is your organization witnessing specifically in the Central Mediterranean?
Well, the Central Mediterranean has been a growing route to Europe constantly. Even during the pandemic, the figures kept on the rise. And as you said, the figures in the first 3 months of this year are 4 times higher than last year, the same period. So it's quite clear that there are a number of traveling routes towards Europe that are arriving now to Italy mainly, and Italy is overburdened with this pressure.
I want to read something that the IOM has put out. Delays in state-led rescues on the Central Mediterranean route were a factor in at least 6 incidents or shipwrecks this year alone, leading to the deaths of at least 127 people. The complete absence of a response to a 7th case claimed the lives of at least 73 people. Would you say European governments have blood on their hands?
I believe that there is an urgent need for the European member states to take seriously a proposal that the Commission itself presented in order to address the 3 key issues at stake. First, people need to be prevented from embarking on dangerous journeys. That depends on the cooperation with the countries of the departure. Secondly, there is a need for a state-led initiative about search and rescue. We cannot just leave that to the NGOs. And of course, we need to prevent people from dying in the Mediterranean. And thirdly, and this is very important, there is a need to have predictability in the disembarkation points, because they cannot just go to the closer port, and there is a need to set up a swift relocation process, not to overburden those countries that are geographically exposed.
It's interesting that you say this coordination when it comes to receiving these people, the disembarkation ports. I haven't worked on this issue for as long as you did, but I feel quite disheartened by how nothing seems to change year after year since I started covering the Central Mediterranean. It's almost like I could use the same words, the same pictures to describe the situation year after year. You understand the European Union. You have been a commissioner for the EU. Why do you think that is? Why can't European governments come together to tackle this issue?
Well, indeed, you are right. The European Commission has put forward a proposal for a pact on asylum and migration, to have common approach and common standards among all EU member states. It's quite clear that the progress in adopting the legal instruments of the pact has not progressed that much. That shows that there are still differences in the perspective how migration is seen by different member states. But my key point is that no country alone can tackle with a challenge. So only working together can we succeed. And for that, I think it's absolutely necessary to have a strong pressure on the European institutions and on the European member states to come to a joint approach.
In terms of the data you collect in the areas that you are monitoring, specifically in Europe, are there places that are of your concern right now?
Yes, we have had a very serious crisis last year in Belarus, in the border with Poland. And I've made it very clear that we condemn any kind of instrumentalization of migrants and refugees by one state for political ends. And these kind of situations cannot happen again. We cannot accept that illusions are created to people in despair, with the idea that there are simple and fast-track gateways towards another country or towards Europe. That's a violation of international law, a violation of the fundamental rights of migrants and refugees, and what happened last year cannot happen again.
When it comes to a positive lesson, I would say, that Europe has shown the world when it comes to addressing migration routes and legal options for people to move. I would say the war in Ukraine has served as a good example of what can be done when countries come together and try to find a cohesive plan. But there's been quite a lot of criticism with regards to that, because some, and I'm quoting activists and humanitarian workers, said that it felt like it was a double standard. When migrants, when refugees look like us or have the same religion as us, then they are welcomed. What do you say to that?
I believe that the use of the Temporary Protection Directive that I put forward when I was Commissioner in 2020 and was then approved, proved to be a very effective instrument of solidarity, of support. But it's a very challenging situation, because you are dealing with people traumatized by the war, people vulnerable to abuse, to exploitation, particularly women and children, and you need to find the necessary resources to support a long-standing stay in the host countries, because now we are already more than 1 year after the beginning of the Russian invasion, and the prospects of returning to Ukraine don't seem around the corner, because people can only return when the security conditions are met in order to reconstruct Ukraine, which is going to be badly needed.
Multiple crises that are compounded right now, and there's obviously one that looms above, I guess, all of them: climate change. We've been talking about it for a while now, how weather could indeed be the #1 source of displacement for people in the future. But we're talking already about some 20 million people being displaced by these phenomena every year. Do you sense governments understanding the challenge ahead of them and taking measures to try and come up with a system, at least, that would accommodate these people being displaced, fleeing their homes?
There are more people displaced because of climate change than because of conflicts, in spite of the fact that in many countries there are climate vulnerable countries with conflicts inside. So the two elements play together, they interact, and they are triggers of displacement. These people that are impacted by climate change, 20 million per year, for instance, in the last decade, these people are, for the time being, mainly internally displaced people. But sooner or later they will cross an international border and they will become, let's so-called, climate migrants. And that's why the conclusions of Sharm el-Sheikh were important. Because for the first time in the COP27, it was recognized that climate change is already having an impact today in forcing people to be displaced, and we need to provide them with life-saving assistance and then finding durable solutions for their future.
But how far are we from that? I mean, because one thing is recognizing, yes, indeed, there is a problem, right? But then how long until that is translated into action? And in your opinion, do we have this time?
We need to act urgently, in global terms about climate change and in concrete terms to the most vulnerable regions in the world. And of course, for that, we need to bet on adaptation, mitigation, and building the resilience of the communities. Many countries are already taking those measures, but the effort that is required goes beyond their capacity. So there is a need for a mobilization of the international community to support those countries.
António Vitorino, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Euronews.